Hi, so welcome to our Ask Me Anything event, Women's History Month edition. So excited to hear from and learn from these two powerhouse women that we have today who've kind of led the way for youth engagement in 2024. It's great to see some new faces and some returning faces in the chat. My name is Katie Parham. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the social media manager for the National Democratic Training Committee. And prior to joining NDTC in January, so I'm still really new, I was a community organizer turned campaign staffer. So I'm so excited to be moderating today's panel as we get ready to start. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat with your name, pronouns, if you'd like to share, and where you're joining from. Let's see. Awesome. Chicago, Allison, love. Awesome. Okay, so I know y'all are eager to hear from, oh, we got some Fayetteville, North Carolina. We were just talking about North Carolina earlier. Chicago, lots of Chicago folks. Love to see it. I know, oh, North Carolina is really turning up today. I know y'all are eager to hear from our amazing panelists, but before we get started, I want to give a quick overview of NDTC. So the National Democratic Training Committee is how Democrats win elections and build long-term power in their communities. Our free tools and trainings enable every Democrat, no matter background, zip code, or resources, to step up and lead change in communities. So the women you'll meet today have a wide variety of personal and professional experiences in the world of Democratic campaigns, and I'm so excited for you guys to hear from them firsthand. I do have a few housekeeping announcements. Gotta get them out of the way. We have 3 virtual training norms at NDTC that we want to remind everyone of today. It's to please be respectful, be present, and ask questions and participate. Live closed captioning is available on today's webinar. To enable it, you can click on live transcript in the menu at the bottom of your screen, then click show subtitle. We will also be using the Q&A box during this webinar to ask our panelists questions, and the one and only Bridget, who's already dropped a couple things in the chat, will be helping me manage that. And so we have plenty of time for questions and want to hear from you. So please be sure to ask these awesome women your questions. And throughout, Bridget will also be dropping helpful resources. These are all available on traindemocrats.org. So you just need to make a free account and you'll be able to access them. So before we get rolling, is there any questions on how this panel works? Seeing none, I'll answer if we get there, but our Ask Me Anything programming combines the expertise of Democratic leaders by convening them for a conversation. So we host these collaborative spaces where discussions can focus on the most pressing campaign topics of the moment so that you walk away with the skills and insights you need now. So I'm going to turn it over to the panelists to introduce themselves really quick. So I'll start with Eve. I'll let you take it away.
Hi all, thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here. My name's Eve Levinson. I use she, her pronouns, currently calling in from Washington, D.C., but I'm originally from Los Angeles, California. I got started in organizing through my community in Los Angeles and specifically my Jewish community and doing a lot around homelessness in LA and around just in my school specifically. The first election cycle, I really did volunteer work in. I did a little in 2016, but in 2018, when I was a senior in high school, I'm 25 for context, and really did a lot of volunteer work around outsourcing blue energy from Los Angeles into the key House districts in California that were key to regaining the House. I worked at March for Our Lives for a little under 3 years, leading their policy and political work, and got to do a lot around training young people on how to lobby, both at the federal level and state levels. I then, after that, worked for Speaker Pelosi's political team, doing digital engagement and groups or digital organizing and partner group engagement. And I most recently was the National Youth Engagement Director on the Biden and then Harris campaign.
Awesome. Thank you, Eve. So such an amazing career. Like, you are one of the people that I look up to. And I've fangirled about your work for like a very long time. So Holly, why don't you take it away as well and introduce yourself, another powerhouse woman that is leading the charge.
Thank you, Katie. It is such an honor to be here with you, Eve. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Holly. I'm a sophomore studying international and public affairs at Brown University, and I got involved in politics in high school The first campaign I really got involved in was Beto O'Rourke when he was running for governor in Texas, which is where I'm from Austin. Um, and that was in 2022 when I was a senior in high school. And then after that, simultaneously, I was involved in the High School Democrats of America, and now I'm involved with the College Democrats of America and recently got elected as their vice president. And I'm also very involved with the Brown University College Democrats and do a lot of local organizing both in Providence and back in Texas. And I'm super excited to be here today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for like all the work. Like really, I wasn't as involved in Texas politics when I was growing up. So to see, someone take that much action so early on is really, really inspiring. I think we're going to jump right into questions if that's okay with y'all. I know that I've experienced some assumptions about motivating young people. And so, what is one persistent assumption about motivating young people to take political action that you would encourage candidates and Democratic Party leaders to question, and why? So, Holly, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, for sure. I think right now it's really important that young people get involved in politics more than ever. And that's something that I'm constantly working in with college Democrats across the country to make sure that we are taking charge and doing whatever we can. A lot of the times, young people are seen as people that don't really have power because we're told that we're too young and that we don't belong here. But that's not true. There's a lot that we can do. And that means like stepping up and showing up. And that's what we try to do as college Democrats. And that means working within the party systems and the opportunities that we have. And so the motivation behind that is to get more young people involved, whether it's running for office or whether it's being involved in party leadership or organizing within their local communities, even in like non-political contexts. Not everything has to be political. I think a lot of the stuff we do are also like issue advocacy driven. And so we try to push that as well because the motivations behind getting into political spaces and harnessing political power at the end of the day is really about tackling the issues that matter the most to young people. And the only way we can see that change is if more people get involved that are young. And so that's something that we're constantly trying to work on in the College Democrats. And that's kind of our mission, getting more young people involved in politics, in democratic politics, and empowering the next generation of democratic leaders.
Absolutely. And like, what are some of the ways and like events that you guys are hosting to motivate young people? Are they in person? Are they virtual? Like, what does that look like for college Dems?
So most of our events are usually led by chapters and states on like campuses. So like Brown College Dems, like just last week had an event with um, Tom Perez, the former DNC chair, actually. And a lot of these events are local and like campus specific. And campuses host their own like guest speakers that talk about their experiences with politics and how, and it inspires a lot of us to get more involved. And we have a lot of mentorship programs within for these campus chapters and states so that people know and they can get advice from people that are already in power or people that are already working within the political system to understand how they can contribute to it and be a part of it too. And then recently, we're actually working on a panel as well on our own for young people in politics already. So like having the youngest state party chairs like Anderson Clayton be there, or like the youngest city council member who's also a college student, having them talk about like what it means to like be a part of this party and be a young person in it. And like David Hogg is going to be on that panel too. Like he's the youngest DNC vice chair ever, member of Gen Z. And so I think hearing from these people and their experiences can really help people learn about the fact that they can do it too.
Right. That's awesome. I think that's such important work and like doing, on the ground activations in these state and local levels is so, so important. Eve, what do you think about, the persistent assumptions that I'm sure you encountered as you fought for youth advocacy and engagement throughout your career?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a few things here. So I think one is we get the assumption a lot that people say that young people aren't interested or aren't politically engaged. I think, right, that we have really dispelled that mentality over the last many cycles. And I think, right, like even in the, I guess now like 7 years that I've been doing this work, I think we've seen some shifts there, especially in like when I look at like what it was like in like 2018, 2019 versus like the last few years, and even the way and like the work that I was able to do and the work that was viewed as what should be done like on the presidential campaign, I think is definitely different than how it was when you look at like 2016 or even 2020. So I think that that's one thing I think we have largely gotten past those assumptions. I do think though there's still the assumption about like what way should young people be engaging in politics or in a campaign, right? And I think that very often young people are not given the leadership roles that they should be, especially when it comes to youth engagement, right? And are oftentimes looked as sort of just like the people who should be doing the work versus those who I think can be leading the work. And I think that the reality is that, like, obviously we want people who have those experiences, but there are a lot of young people who have those experiences, who have put in those years of work, who have sort of that knowledge both about what does it mean to be young, what does it mean to connect to your peers, but also the professional experience. I think also a lot of times we see young people being sort of maybe like pigeonholed into certain things. We'll see a lot of young people that are really given more leadership or listened to more when it comes to digital engagement, but when it's anything offline, there's sort of not that same recognition of what is the value of having those young voices. So I think that that's the reality of like, and my advice, I think, would be right to like understand like there's a value add to having young people in that work. When we look at constituency work for pretty much any other constituency, it's a must have in our space that that constituency work should be led by the community that you're serving. And we're not fully there with young people, which has always been something that's like kind of shocked me. And I think a lot of that comes from a lack of understanding about how to effectively build intergenerational partnerships and work in an intergenerational way. And what I've always found to be key is to understand like that everybody can learn from each other, sort of, right? So like whether somebody's been doing this 30 years longer, that's going to come with some pros. It's also going to come with some things that maybe they're a little more set in their ways, and it's going to be valuable for them to work with somebody who's younger and newer to it. And it also comes though with the onus, I think, on as young people doing this work, knowing that there are things that we don't know from not having done it as long, but that doesn't mean that we don't have other value adds to bring. So I think there's that. I think also, right, like something that we really learned last cycle is that young, and this is more about like looking at young voters, that young voters can't only be turnout targets and mobilization targets, but they need to be persuasion targets. There's been this mentality for a while that if we just turn out young people, if we just register young people, they will vote for us as Democrats. And while most of the data suggests that young voters are the only age demo that Kamala won the majority of. We won it by such a much smaller majority than we did in 2020 and previous years when Democrats have won. And that is a concerning side. And I want to make sure that the lesson from that the lesson of that is not that we stop investing in young people, but rather that we need to invest persuasion dollars in them. We need to be starting programs earlier so that we can really do that persuasion and training our organizers and volunteers and partner groups to have really persuasive conversations, whereas we normally have looked at the youth space as just make sure they know how to vote and when to vote and how to register, but not how to have those real deep conversations.
So for some that are like less familiar with like persuasion tactics, can you like give, a handful of examples of like what that might look like in the youth space? I think you're muted, Eve. Real quick.
I am muted. You're right. Thank you. I was saying it's really the difference of when you're like looking, for example, like how do you train an organizer, of the difference of saying, okay, we're going to make sure that this organizer is equipped with knowing how to register somebody to vote and how to tell somebody to vote versus going to somebody that's an undecided voter, or maybe somebody that has heard maybe whether it's misinformation or otherwise something like, for example, let's take abortion, right? Maybe somebody, a young person who would have said, I care about abortion, but I don't think that like Donald Trump's actually going to outlaw it, or I don't know what Kamala Harris is going to do to protect my abortion rights. And really equipping that person who's going to be faced with that conversation to be able to talk to that person about, well, why do they think that? And actually help them get to a point of understanding what is at stake in this election. Sometimes that's called like deep canvassing. It can be called like just persuasion language. Like there are a lot of different buzzwords around it, but it's basically the idea of rather than solely making sure somebody understands the mechanics of voting, that they can actually have a conversation to sort of get somebody from undecided to supporting our candidate.
Got it. And this kind of, there's a Q&A from one of the people in the group, and it kind of follows up on that, is what do you think are the differences between like mobilizing and persuading young voters and older voters?
So I'll give a kind of non-answer and then answer. I think there's like a lot that's the same, and yet there's also stuff that's different. So, right, I think that the reality is like anytime you're trying to persuade a voter, you want to know and understand like where are they coming from, what's the issue that's most important to them, and then figure out how to get them to connect that to why the election that you're talking about is valuable. I think that those like that same general principle is the same for younger and older voters. I think what issues somebody cares about can differ, but I think that sometimes we mistake that for being like young voters don't care as much about the economy, when the reality is young voters do care about the economy, but they might care about it in a different way, right? So it might not be about, oh, I have a like I have this loan on my house and I need to pay off. Maybe it's about thinking about whether or not you're ever going to even be able to achieve home ownership in your life. Maybe instead of thinking about paying off the student loans that you have, it's about whether or not you can even think about going to college because you would have to take out student loans. It's about knowing, right? I actually think student loan is a great example of this, because what we saw was so many young people didn't feel that the last administration was supportive of student loan debt, not because they weren't supportive of student loan debt, but because the way that the actual loan forgiveness that went through happened was mostly going to people who had already been paying off their loans for a decade. And so, right, that's like, it's not to say that maybe student loans aren't an issue that both a young voter and an older voter would care about. But if you go to a young voter and you're like, oh, well, X number of dollars has been canceled in student loan debt, that young voter is very likely going to say, nobody I know has had their student loans canceled at their recent college grad, because nobody their age has had their student loans canceled. And so it's, again, it's thinking about like, what is the experience of that person and how does that vary? Another big difference with young people is that most young voters have never known a world of politics without Trump. Even I, right? I'm 25. I'm like very much in the center of like what you normally consider your young voter demo. I'm obviously older than most people who are currently in college, right? Like my first election that I remember cognizantly, I mean, like I vaguely remember a 2008 primary, but just because like I was in a political family that followed politics, that was like, oh, this is historic. It changes your perception if you don't remember a time before Trump. The idea of like, what did politics look like before? Let's go back to that isn't going to resonate as well with somebody who has no memory themselves of what does politics look like pre-Trump. And I think COVID is obviously another big indicator there.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So Holly, what do you think about that, about messaging to young voters and older voters and the difference in tactics?
I think that younger voters consume news and media related to politics in a very different way. And there is a deep divide between the kinds of media that we're consuming versus like older Democrats or even just Americans in general. And the way that we kind of attack that is by figuring out like how can we get into the spaces where they're consuming media that is related to politics. So that means like getting into spaces like TikTok. It also means meeting people where they're at. And that means like direct voter contact, right? Like I think even phone banking isn't super effective anymore because people aren't going to pick up their phones, especially like younger voters. Like most of the time when I'm on the dialers, I'm talking to like people that are retired, right? That are like sitting at home and that are like that even have landlines still. And that's not the way to like reach younger voters. The way to reach them is mostly through social media. It's through like doing Instagram lives. And I think a lot of that has been successful and we can see like people that are currently doing that. Like I think the reason AOC and people like even Bernie are so popular with young people is because they're meeting people where they're at. They're using TikTok to the best of their ability. They're doing Instagram lives with their constituents, right? But they're also going and physically meeting their constituents. They're holding town halls. They're making themselves available. They're showing that they're standing up for people. And I think the Democrats can do the same thing. The party infrastructure and apparatus at all different levels can be doing the same thing. Like state parties should be doing the same thing. They should be utilizing social media. They should also be getting ahead of the news cycle, right? Because not everyone's consuming like traditional media anymore. Like people that are my age, I don't know any of my friends that are tuning into MSNBC every night, right? But they are on TikTok a lot, right? They are on Instagram, and some of them are even on Twitter. And so that's the way to really reach what we're where we're at. But also, it doesn't matter how much you reach people if you have a broken script. So I also think we need to like fix that. And that means like showing that Democrats are going to be out there fighting for what young people want, right? Like we don't, I mean, as much as like social issues are important to us, I think that this election cycle, we kind of proved that like there are other important issues that are more important to us. Like, for example, the cost of living or like the ability to like buy a house, like the economy, like the ability to like get a job in this job market. Especially because so many people are losing their jobs right now, mostly because of like what Trump is doing, and also because like the markets are down, like people are worried about like heading into recession. Economic security, like job security, financial security are really important to our generation. And like studies have shown that like Gen Z is having a harder time reaching the same standards of living that their parents and grandparents have had. And so it's harder for us to do those same things. And the cost of higher education has gotten increasingly higher. I'm a college student and I'm going to have a lot of debt when I graduate. And that's something that I have to think about all the time. And I can say the same for many of my friends as well. And so these are priorities that we want people to see and reach us. And the messaging needs to incorporate that people are fighting for Gen Z's values. And that's what the Democratic Party needs to prioritize if we want to win back the youth vote.
Yeah, I think that's really, really powerful. Like, I particularly resonate with the conversation about moving beyond digital at times too. Like, I think so often Gen Z and young people are looped into only digital outreach. And so combining tactics and layering tactics to persuade and mobilize people, I think is a really interesting strategy for the party to consider going forward. We've kind of touched on this already, but to directly ask is like, we've talked about the 2024 election, and a lot of the discourse has focused on the communication and messaging failures, which we kind of have talked about. But we did do some things right this election, and there were some revolutionary changes from campaign tactics to campaign structure. So what were some of your respective organization's successes? I'll let Holly take this one first.
Yeah, so college Democrats are largely organizers, right? We are unpaid and paid volunteers on local campaigns, state campaigns, congressional campaigns from like up and down the ballot. But we do more than just volunteer. We also mobilize. We mobilize our communities. We canvass. We phone bank. We also organize on campuses, whether it's hosting voter registration drives, holding or creating polling locations on campus, providing resources for people to like get out the vote, and doing a bunch of GOTV, whether it's like dorm storming on campuses, whether it's reaching out to people outside of college campuses, like within our local communities, knocking on doors, whatever it might be. That's what we've been doing this cycle. And we've had like the most amount of grassroots engagement we've ever seen. We've hit over 30 million voter contacts directly. And that includes everything from phone banking to door knocking to hosting like town halls with our like local like school board members or like representatives that are campaigning that college Democrats are working with and collaborating on campaigns with. We've also hit a record number of press hits and also media partnerships with other organizations that we work with. I think our biggest takeaway from this election season is that we've understood the importance of coalition building, right? Like college Democrats are just one entity in like a larger playing field, but we work with other organizations because we realize we're not the only people out there and that we have to work together, and like the more the merrier. And so we've partnered with organizations that do a lot of issue advocacy. Because I believe democratic politics is more than just about like the Democratic Party. It's about the issues that the party is fighting for. And that means having people on your team that are supporting issues like gun violence prevention, like pro-choice advocacy. And so we've worked with March for Our Lives, Students Demand Action. We've partnered with the Sunrise Movement on climate policy, because that is something that is really important to this generation. Along with the Young Feminist Party, which we've worked with on helping pass ballot measures in local areas for abortion rights. And we're going to continue to do this because we realize that that's very critical to the success of mobilizing the Democratic Party and young people within the party. And that was kind of our big success, like building this community of people that we're still constantly working with, even post-election, to mobilize for these issues, whether it's helping college Democrats locally testify at their state legislatures, whether it's lobbying. Recently, we've just partnered with the Newtown Action Alliance for lobbying against bills that would make it easier for people to get their hands on guns in state legislatures. And we're going to continue doing that kind of work because what we realized as well from this election season is that our work does not stop after elections are over. Has to be a year-round effort. And that means that we build from the bottom up, not the top down. And that means starting from local elections, right? Like there are actually 60,000 elections this year alone that are not congressional, that are local, like from mayoral races in New York City to primaries for gubernatorial races coming up in states like New Jersey, in Texas, and even California. And these are just as impactful too. And we have to start mobilizing for these elections so that when the next election cycle comes around and 2028 is up again, we are not fighting and scrambling and starting from scratch and building infrastructure for like 100 days that will end after that, right? College Dems aren't just like an arm of a campaign. We're like an arm of the party, and we are here to stay. We're not going anywhere.
Yeah, I think that's really, really powerful, like the year-round organizing aspect, and to continue to mobilize and engage on issues. Eve, what was your experience from Harris for President?
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate this question because I think that there's obviously a lot of really important and valid conversations going on about what went wrong and where we can improve. But obviously not literally every single thing went wrong. And I know this was something for me that was really hard, like immediately after the election, to think about like, what did we do that was right? But like, it's two sides of the coin. We need to fix what was wrong. And we need to continue and grow upon what was right. And so that's something I know that I've been trying. And I think especially, I'm sure there are a lot of folks in this call who either are staffers, maybe have gone through some of your like staffer training programs. And so I just want to name that, like, I think win or lose, right, there will always be things we did right and things we did wrong. Obviously, when we lose, there are probably more things we did wrong, but a lot of those aren't necessarily in an individual's control, depending on where they were inside of like a giant campaign, like a presidential campaign. So I will say, I think there are a few things that we did on the campaign that I'm particularly proud of. I think one is I think we're able to work with our partners really well and sort of brought in an existing like coordinating communication space of a youth table that I had worked on previously before the campaign, and brought that in, which I think was able to allow us to have that strong partnership. We saw like unified endorsements coming from youth organizations, both for the Biden-Harris and the Harris-Walz campaign, and also I think some really great ways to be able to then make sure that we were well equipped to be able to plug in state affiliates of national groups like College Gems and others to connect with our individual coordinated campaigns. So I think that was particularly good. And I think also something that I was always encouraging our state campus directors to think about was like, obviously the campaign is doing this work now, but those jobs end. And how do we make sure that we're building relationships with the groups that are going to be able to continue that work after the campaign ends and between campaigns? I think also we were able to do a lot in sort of how we viewed campus organizing within the campaign. And I think like legitimizing within a campaign space, like what does campus organizing look like? We had over 150 staff across the country that were dedicated to campus and youth organizing, which is one of the, if not the largest, I think, like staff investment we've seen in specifically youth organizing, which I think was really good. It obviously varied a lot by states. One example of where I think was really good also was Michigan. They've highlighted sort of having a specific team of staff that were dedicated to non-campus youth engagement as well, which I think is a really big gap that we have as a Democratic Party in terms of how do we intentionally target young people. I think we do it online, but in person that are not currently college students or may never go off to college. And I think, right, that obviously has a lot to do with overall the party's deficiencies. That's a very aggressive word, but I guess makes sense here with reaching non-college educated voters in general. Like those people are also, yeah, there are people who do not go off to college and we do not do a good job of reaching them. So I think, right, like there's the Michigan team did some really great work there and being able to figure out where are these young people gathering? How do we gather them, whether they're young veterans or they're involved in their religious communities, and how are we organizing and reaching them in those spaces? Something else that I was really proud of was we did young organizer training summits, which are really great, where we were able to train young people and then connect them directly to jobs that were being hired, both within our campus programs, but outside of it. And so I think that was really great that we were able to do. And I know that those staff, when they ended up joining, felt super well equipped. And it was also a big asset in terms of our organizing teams who needed to find more organizers or interns to be able to find those folks. So I think those are a few of the things that I'm particularly proud of that we did last cycle.
Yes, and I also want to like celebrate and uplift how responsive you were like to people, because I remember I reached out to you, I think like January of last year, like, you know, after organizing in Tennessee, wanting to, you know, do that. And so you were responsive on DMs. And I think that goes a long way, because I don't think I ever emailed you, but it's, you know, being innovative in how you make yourself available as well to young people. So thank you for taking my DM all that a while ago. Um, you know, I think we've talked a lot kind of about the messaging, and I think one thing that online and maybe in general is like it was reacting. We were reacting to the behavior. And so as we move forward, where do you see the biggest opportunity for organizers and candidates to be proactive instead of reacting solely to the extremism that we are experiencing under this administration? Eve, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a tough question. I think the reality right now is that a lot of groups, I think right now are kind of in this phase of wanting to do a lot, but not necessarily feeling like the resources are there. And so I think we're in this moment where like folks really need to think about like how do we with the resources we have, obviously we need to get more resources, and that's like a whole other conversation. Don't worry, like with the resources we have, like what can we do? Because we need to do stuff. There is awful stuff coming out of like a few blocks that way in DC, coming out of the administration. And I think it's a few things. I think one is like, how are we equipping whatever your base is, whoever that may be, whether you're an individual who has a few hundred or a few thousand followers, whether you're an organization with a membership list or a large email list, like how are you equipping them with the tools to like know what's going on and know what to do to make an impact? And I think that like the people who are able to provide those resources are going to see a lot of people coming to them, and they don't need to be large financial resources, right? It can be as simple as here's the email tool to call if you can't make a call here. Here is the best 3 resources to look at in terms of like what's going on right now and how to understand what's happening. But also I think a lot of people are looking for an outlet for what's going on and are looking for an outlet to be able to feel like they can make a difference. And I think that like our job as organizers is to help provide that. And I know a lot of us are struggling with that also when it feels like everything's going so awfully. But I think also some of that does come from like training, right? Like we need to equip. I've been thinking a lot about how like I was a sophomore in high school when Donald Trump was first elected. And there was, I was that class of folks that like finished off high school then. And a lot of people got really politically engaged and were really anxious about what was going on. And we saw this not just with young people, right? Like we saw this with people in general everywhere, but people were looking for like, what can I do? And there's honestly much more horrible stuff happening now than there was then, but there's not those same outlets for people. And so I think like when you say about like not being reactive, to me, it's about like, how are we giving people those resources, pointing them in those directions, giving them the training to know if you're upset about something, like what is a productive way to express that? What is a productive and safe way to express that?
Yeah, absolutely. I know I as well am feeling like where do we go from here? What can I do? And something that I've been doing is like volunteering is in my local community, and getting involved at that level. And that's, I think, finding outlets and creating those opportunities. Like my Young Dims chapter did a volunteer cleanup event, to clean up the river. And so finding those creative outlets to make a difference in the communities is really important right now. So Holly, what do you think? What are you in College Dims planning to try to counter this and create opportunity and proactive messaging?
This is a really good question. This is something that I think about a lot, and sometimes it keeps me up at night because, yeah, I mean, Eva's right. Like, a lot of people, like, I think it is very much a misconception that young people do not care and don't keep up with politics because we do. Like, we do. It's literally everywhere. It's like on our social media feeds, like on every other TikTok. And it's also in the real world affecting a lot of us, right? Some people are on like financial aid, like federal financial aid, they're losing that now. Some people are losing their internships because they don't have the research funding for that anymore. And like my university is losing like $400 million in funding, or it's expected to, because of the Department of Education potentially going away. And so there are a lot of different things that very much do affect us. And so young people definitely care. But I think the difficult part, and this is something that we are trying to figure out as college Dems, is how to translate this kind of, I guess, like emotion and like the amount that we do really care and translate that into like political action, and most importantly political power. And that's what we're trying to do. And I think it starts with it starts with, I think, young people infiltrating every area of politics, from like influencing to like running for county party positions, or like becoming a member of like your state party's central committee, or even like running for office. Like we have someone on our executive board that is a school board member, right? The youngest city council member in the country is 19 years old. He's a college student, and I know him, and he's in like Indiana. And like people like, Anderson Clayton, and recently like a new state party chair of Oregon's Democratic Party is 27 years old. Like that is huge. And David Hogg currently is recruiting people to run for office that are young people, for his PAC that literally fundraises for young people to run for office. And I think that if young people want to see the transformational change to counter this tyranny that MAGA is putting up in the White House and in Congress every single day, the only way we can take charge, I think, is to get in those positions of power. Because I think if there's anything that young people are concerned about, is the Democratic Party not really doing enough, or like doing what is needed and things that they want to see. And I'm not sure if we'll see the change we want to see unless we're the ones to go and do it. And I think that's the time that we need to see a new generation of leadership within the party. And that means every level of the party, like from local positions all the way up to Congress, and even in like the party apparatus as well. And so we're trying to provide as many resources as we can for our members to take charge of their environments and do what they can to like empower them to run for these positions, give them the resources they need, from trainings to mentorships to connecting them with the right people. And that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And like very much so on that note kind of leads me to my second question is like, what piece of advice would you give to people who are interested in like organizing or running for office, but are concerned, about immersing themselves in this political climate that is hostile towards women? It could be intimidating for young people. What would your advice be? So Holly.
Well, I have multiple pieces of advice. I think the first thing is getting to know as many people as you can. I think the most things that I've learned in this environment and political space is not actually from my own experiences, but from other people's, right? Learning from people that have done the stuff before I have, or people that are doing different things than I am, and figuring out like what is for you. Because I don't think that like everyone is meant to run for office. I don't think it's for everyone. Personally, I don't know if I ever want to run for office, but I do think that there's different ways to make change in the political space, and kind of figuring out where you fit into that, I think is really important because everybody has their own strengths and weaknesses that they bring. Like I've worked in communications for a long time. Before I was vice president, I was communications director for college Dems, and before that, I was communications director for the high school Dems. And I really realized like this was kind of my thing. I really liked political communications and reaching people, and I love social media. I think it's just kind of like a generational thing, but not everyone does, and that's totally fine, right? Kind of figuring out like what's for you, and the best way to do that is to try as many different things as you can. And that's kind of what I've done. I worked on a campaign. I was a staffer. I didn't hate it, but I didn't really love it either. I worked on the Hill as an intern. I like the Hill, but I don't see myself doing that long term. And I'm also currently involved in my state party as a committee member and also a DNC member, and I really enjoyed that. And I'm going to continue doing what seems right for now, but I think for everyone that's going to look a little different, and that's okay. I think people need to be patient and also just learn from other people as much as possible. Like I've talked to people that are in very different careers, whether it's like in party leadership, or maybe they're just like running for local office. Like I'm pretty good friends with my city council member, and he's taught me about his experience and how he's gotten there. But there's so many different ways. And I've talked to Anderson Clayton about what it was like to be like the youngest person running for a state party chair. And there's ups and downs, but I think that we just have to keep going and keep trying and seeing what works for us.
Yeah, I think like experimenting, like that's the beauty of being young that I think people don't talk about is the opportunity to try new things. And like a lot of the decisions we make today, career paths can change quickly. And it's not permanent. And so exploring, trying comms, trying field, trying a nonprofit, working at your state party, like taking advantage of this time while we are young to experiment and get as many and as many diverse experiences as possible, I think is really, really important. Eve, what do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing is like one, like we need to be honest, right? That like the political space does still have sexism on our side, right? And I think that like we don't do anybody any favors when we try to claim otherwise. And so I think like that's important to note. Because I also think it's important for people to know like what they get themselves into. That being said, right? Like I don't know if there's necessarily a field that is like 100% solved sexism. So I would hope that wouldn't steer too many people away from it. I do also think, right, like there are distinct things that if you are a female candidate are going to be different. I don't have as much experience with that because I've never run, but I think the key that I found is finding other women that can be mentors, that can be friends, because sometimes, right, there are going to be things that happen that are really frustrating. And sometimes you're going to want to speak out about it. Sometimes you're going to want to roll your eyes and go and get a drink with your friend about it and bitch about it, right? And like that's really valuable. And I think about this a lot. And just, I think in general, right, if you're going to be going to campaigns, especially right, the experience I just had of like moving to a different place for 10 months, right? Like having those friends there and the people that I could connect with, I think was extremely valuable. And I think that those relationships are really important, both in terms of in a work setting, right? Maybe you want someone that's going to be able to back you up in a meeting. Maybe you want somebody that you can send something to and be like, hey, I just wrote up this memo, proposal, whatever it was you asked to write up. Before I send it in, like, can I get you to take like put another set of eyes on it? And having that person you can go to, or maybe it is the person that you're going to go to if God forbid something really bad does happen, you're like, how do I navigate reporting this? Or maybe it's something that you just want to bitch about. Like, I think that those people and those friends are really important, and figuring them out and the people that are going to last between, I think, the different roles that you're in, I think are also really valuable. And I will say, right, like, I don't think I've like exclusively sought out like female mentors, but like those are the ones that I have bonded more with. And I think that like being able to find those people regardless of age, I think some of them, right, have been people that are my age, that are other young women that have been in this space and talking about what it's been like, but also people that have been doing it for a lot longer. I think really that's the key of it. And I think also finding your male allies and friends that also are willing to talk about it and hear about it and be told honestly, like, hey, this is what my experience has been. I have a really vivid memory of a time that I was working on a program that I was co-running with a friend of mine who with a friend of mine, and like we walked out of a meeting and I was like, yeah, like, did you notice what happened in there? Where like I said something and like nobody really listened to it at first, whatever. And he was like, oh wow, like I didn't actually notice that, right? But when you say that to a friend and you have that like level of trust there, like I think that is also how you make change in these spaces, is by like building those relationships where you can say that and the person realizes it. And then that person can become somebody who then can continue to notice that and change that later. So I think that would be my advice there. I think also, right, like the good news is it depends on the environment. Like we are in the progressive and democratic space, and that does mean that I think people are more open to hearing about what is it that can be making those things better? Where are we still seeing these systemic issues playing out? Where are we still seeing sexism playing out and creating barriers to women? But I think also, right, again, like talk to other women that have been doing about it and have maybe navigated those similar situations. Because unfortunately, I do think we go through similar stuff, but it also means that you shouldn't have to do it alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of on that note, Luke dropped a question. He says, "Hello, honored to be here with some incredible women and leaders. What are the best resources y'all can point men in politics who aspire to empower women in politics to?" So you mentioned like being an ally. Are there any organizations or resources that they can volunteer, get involved in that are kind of leading the way for women in politics?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're interested in like supporting like women candidates, right? Like there are a lot of organizations that do that. Emily's Lists endorse young women, a lot of the repo organizations, Planned Parenthood, NARAL, there's not NARAL anymore, Reproductive Freedom for All do that. And I think just like supporting folks there. I think also just like being mindful of it, right? I think that a lot of times I was in an event the other day, right? And like I stood there and watched like it was a fundraiser for somebody and watched like all these folks look directly at like the guy that I was sitting next to and like not say anything to me, right? And it was like frustrating, whatever, but like being mindful of that, right? Because like it can suck to always have to be the woman who needs to like interact and be like, "Hi, I'm Eve. I've been standing here also. Like, so great to get to talk to you." Right. And so I think like what I would say is like be mindful of that in the situations that you're in, and especially the people that you are close with that you can have those conversations with. But so yeah, I don't really know which direction you're taking that. It was more so about like supporting women who work in the space or otherwise. I think if you're like support women who work in the space, it's not really like go to this organization and volunteer. It's more about like being mindful and aware of like what's going on around you and asking the women that you do know. I would say that you're close with, right? I'm gonna be totally honest. There was a guy that I like didn't know that well that worked on a team with me, like randomly came up to me and asked me that. Like, depending on what the relationship was, it could rub me the wrong way. But like the people that you are close with, like just ask them about it. Be like, I was thinking about this because I went to this panel.
Yeah, I think like asking, stepping up, being mindful, super important. So Holly, I have a separate question for you. We're both from Texas, both from the South. And when I was at Vanderbilt, I really got involved in organizing in a red state and kind of looking back on my experiences. Um, Working in a red state and organizing there taught me so much that I've carried with me into my career today. And so, although you now work and lead a national organization, College Democrats, you did get your start in Texas. And so, how has beginning your career in a red state impacted your leadership and experiences on this national level?
Am very proud to be from a red state. We have our challenges, we really do, but I think that's what actually makes like in party organizing and infrastructure in red states so critical and also very, very effective. Um, I've lived in more than just Texas. Before Texas, I moved to Texas 6 years ago. Before that, I actually lived in like Southern California, and it's a very difficult or different political environment. And so I think the differences that I really saw that stood out to me is that in a red state, because there's so much at stake, the party infrastructure is not only like more put together, but I think it's also just a lot more like engaging. Like people are like fired up because like there's something always to fight for, right? Like we don't just fight like during elections, we fight during like state legislature sessions because Senate Bill 8 is getting passed and we don't have reproductive rights, or like a school shooting just happened, because that's like every day in a red state. Whereas like I now live in Rhode Island, and before that, last year I split it between New York City and DC, which are very different political environments. And I feel like the energy is very different in a red state. And I kind of bring that energy wherever I go. I feel like even though like I am in a blue state now and there's we're not fighting the same fights as we are in like a state like Texas, I think it's still important to have that because it brings you like a different perspective. And I think especially now at a time where like democratic politics is sometimes it can feel like you're in a bubble. Like I definitely was in a bubble before I moved to Texas, right? Like every day it seems like a great day. I mean, you're just sheltered from a lot of different things because they don't affect you as much. Like the problems that I was facing, that my community and family were facing, were very different before I moved to Texas, and they're very different now. And I think that's really important. I actually think we need a lot more red state representation within like party leadership, right? Like at the national level. And it's really important because organizing in red states is very different than organizing in blue states. And I think our party needs to invest more in red state parties to build that up, because there's a lot more Democrats in those red states than you might think. And investing is the only way to make sure we get those votes. And because they're so critical in red states, like the issues that we're fighting for, it's even more important that we fight in there. And it's not just about like congressional races, right? What matters even more critically are like the local races, because that's what impacts people the most, from state house seats to like school board, like town committees, and that's really important. And so even though technically I'm like not from Texas, I'm from Southern California, it's Texas politics has really impacted the way that I work, because I did get my start there, and organizing my community was a lot harder because my neighbors didn't always think the same way that I did, and it was hard to find like a community because people are so divisive all the time, and like I was in a very polarized environment in high school, and that can feel disheartening, and it can feel like it can be easy to like lose hope in what you're seeing, because progress isn't always easy. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of time and patience. And so those are values that I have kind of still kept with me as I've moved into other states, but also moved up in terms of like organizing and how I oversee organizing on college campuses throughout the country.
That's awesome. I think the investment part is critical, and it's something, as someone who mostly organizes in the South myself, like seeing Tennessee being a super majority and the impact of that, and how we have to fund to break that super majority so that people have basic rights, and that what happens in these southern states don't stay in the southern states. It ends up trying to challenge national law, trying to do that. And so like investing in running, and if you are in a red state, to take the chance and run is so important. Eve, you organized also. I mean, you were all across the country, and so you kind of experienced this. People are asking, how is organizing different in red states compared to blue states?
Yeah, I mean, so I've lived all in blue states, I guess, and DC, not a state. But I think, right, I did a lot of travel this last year, especially looking at the campuses. I think it varies a lot. And obviously my vantage point is less campus organizing. I think we saw in red states that a lot of the college campuses were a lot more hostile to our organizers, were more willing to say you can't be here, or put nonsensical restrictions on it, right? Of like, some places would be like, well, if you're volunteer as a student, they can do it. Other places would say you can't, right? So I think like there are like those extra barriers you have to think through of how do you create metrics that aren't asking organizers to go and do things that are going to violate campus policies? How do you make sure that you're creating ways to build relationships with those places? I think that's some of it. I think, right, also you see different levels of activity of how organized the Republicans are on campuses, or specifically in the U spaces. Turning Point USA, Arizona's a purple state, but Turning Point USA has an extremely strong presence on the college campuses there that really changes what does it mean to be organizing for a Democratic campaign on that campus. I think though also something that I've seen that I think speaks a little to what Sahali was saying about like the strength of the parties is that in a lot of places where that were red states, I think is where we saw some of the strongest organizations of existing groups, particularly of, I think, like young Dems and college Dems, and thinking about like the battleground states that we were in. And I think to me, my based on the conversations there is right, because people really want that political home. I think that people are seeking out more so that Democratic political home in those places where there's not going to be a lot of things. Where I'm from in California, right, there's like 8 bajillion different groups or whatever. And so I think that means like there's necessarily one that's as strong, but I think that means like when you're campaigning, you're going there and you're thinking about like, how do you start this? How do you approach campus organizing? Like there's probably going to be maybe a stronger infrastructure there to be able to plug into.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was just having this conversation with someone, like the power of organizations and grassroots organizations in southern states, or in red states, was really powerful. I think we're gonna rapid fire real quick. One final takeaway, one final piece of advice for everyone listening and tuning in about youth engagement, about being a woman in politics. What is your final takeaway? So Holly, you can go first.
I think there needs to be so much more of us That's my biggest takeaway. Actually, it's really started to hit me like recently. Um, I'm part of like the Brown Political Union on my college campus, and I started to realize there weren't as many women in there. There's like maybe like 5 people, and we're like outnumbered like 3 to 1. Just kind of crazy. It's what's even more crazy that I didn't like realize it. Like I realized it so late, right? Like I just didn't really notice. And I think it's because I've been lucky enough that I haven't always been the only woman in a lot of these environments, but I realized the older I become, the more often it is that like I am becoming the only person in those spaces. And that's something that I've really made a conscious effort to like to help bring more people into the space that are women because there really aren't enough of us. And after that, I started to realize like, oh well, there's only like 20 Democratic senators in Congress that are women, which is insane, right? Like it should not be this way. And like it shouldn't be that like we haven't had a female president yet. Like that's also insane to me. And I like to think that College Gems is pretty diverse, and it is. But that isn't to say like we don't have more work to do. I think it is more important to help bring those women into these spaces because I don't think it's true that women don't care or aren't interested in politics. I think it's just that oftentimes they're just left out of the conversation and they don't feel empowered enough or given enough support to be in these spaces. And so my biggest takeaway is that like I am really conscious of this and I'm like trying to bring more people into this because I realize that the only way we can make these spaces more amenable to women is if there are more of us in it advocating for each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Could not agree more. Eve, I'll let you wrap it up.
Yeah, I think there are a few things here. I think, right, also we didn't really touch on this much today, but I think, right, there's also the intersection of being young and a woman, right? I do think that we see a lot less young women frequently in a lot of those leadership positions. And I think that's something important to note. I think a lot about times when I've been in spaces and maybe there are lots of young people that are brought to the table or listened to or whatever, but a lot of times those are the young men. And I think that sometimes that has to do a lot with like who has some of those like larger platforms and how does that end up playing into like then who is maybe like listened to or seen in those spaces. So I would say sort of think intentionally about that and think intentionally about if you're saying we want to hear from young people, like what sorts of young people does that mean? And that obviously goes beyond just gender. I think also I will say there is understandably a really large focus right now on how do we win back young men. And I think that's 100% a focus that needs to happen and a valid focus. But I'm really concerned about that focus leading to their just perpetuating the reality that it's mostly young men that are in these spaces and not young women, and mostly young men that are being listened to. And I think, right, to be blunt, like the issue is not that there haven't been young men in the youth organizing spaces. They have been there, and we all need to figure out how to better reach and persuade young men. But that's not at the expense of reaching and persuading and continuing to mobilize young women who have always been voting for us in higher rates. And again, I think just like really want to make sure like that does not result in young women not being listened to, because an organizer should be able to reach, if you're a youth organizer, like all of the young people. So that became a little less coherent at the end, but I think my point came across.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so important. It has been the focus of conversations. I think that's a really important thing to be mindful as we begin to rebuild and redirect, that we make sure that we are maintaining our inclusivity in the process. I think that hour flew by. So unfortunately, we're going to be bringing this panel to a close. So first of all, I want to give a huge thank you to Sahali and Eve for all of your work and for sharing your expertise today. You guys are on the front lines and we are all so appreciative of all that you have done. So show them some love in the chat, give them their kudos. But before we sign off, I want to ask everyone to take 1 minute to fill out a brief evaluation that Bridget is going to share. We appreciate your feedback. We are striving to improve our programming, and we can do that most effectively when you let us know how we were doing and give us specific things that went well, what didn't, and things that could be improved. And if you have any questions after this session, if we didn't get to answer it, email us at livetraining@trainedemocrats.org. And make sure you create your free account at trainedemocrats.org to access all of the resources, take courses, consider a run for office. It's all on our website. And I wouldn't be doing my job as a social media manager if I didn't plug our social media handles. So I'm going to drop that in the chat. I'm pretty responsive to DMs as well. So if you guys have questions, I'm pretty active on there. We just launched our Substack and we're excited about it. And so thank you guys for helping me do my job and following all of those. And so thank you guys again so much. Thank you to the panelists and everyone that tuned in. And make sure you go check out our live training schedule to catch our next one. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for joining. Thank you, Eve and Sohali.
Thank you. And thank you, Katie, for moderating.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank y'all. Bye.